Imperva, a Thales company, is the cybersecurity leader that helps organizations protect critical applications, APIs, and data anywhere, at scale, and with the highest ROI. With an integrated approach combining edge, application security, and data security, Imperva protects companies through all stages of their digital journey. Imperva Threat Research and their global intelligence community enable Imperva to stay ahead of the threat landscape and seamlessly integrate the latest security, privacy, and compliance expertise into their solutions. Start a free trial today at securityweekly.com/Imperva.
61%. That's how many U.S. businesses experienced a software supply chain attack in 2023, according to Gartner. This attack surface is constantly expanding. To secure your software supply chain, you first need to control it. JFrog offers an end-to-end platform that manages and controls the binaries and DevOps processes across the entire software development lifecycle. With JFrog, you can deliver trusted software with speed. Visit securityweekly.com/JFrog to learn more and take control of your software supply chain today. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Dustin Lair about making security-oriented conferences for developers appealing and useful so security becomes a mindset instead of a checkbox. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella. One quick announcement, don't lose access to the Security Weekly content you know and love. Keep your favorite podcasts, like us I hope, up to date at securityweekly.com/subscribe. And John, this brings us into more news of the week. So we had a fun time catching up on news last episode. It was a nice double segment, if you will. This week, there's still, once again, software still has bugs, so we get to talk about it. I think I can't resist holding this off to the last. I need my immediate gratification to talk about how, quote, we spent $20 to achieve RCE and accidentally became the admins of .mobi. This is a fun write-up from, who are they? Watchtower Labs.
Watchtower, yeah.
And they, it's a little bit of attitude, a lot of memes, and perhaps even more information in it. But the gist of it is that they were at Black Hat DEF CON, and it started out with that. What's the great thing? That attacker-minded thinking. They were like, what are some ways that some vulnerabilities in who-is clients that they're aware of could be exploited? So they wanted to say, here's some clients. Obviously, using clients it's got a very specific use case scenarios under which people might use a who-is client. So you've got to think about that. And they just thought, okay, well, what do we do? So they were looking around .MOBI TLD, and what they saw is that the registry for it basically changed domain names. So the .mob registry domain had been left to expire in December 2023, and as everyone either knows or is already guessing, it expired. So just like your DNS records, because we've had subdomain takeovers for ages now, certificates also like to expire and cause self-induced outages and other gnarly things. But in this case, the researchers saw that it expired in 2023. They're like, why don't we just spend $20 on it, see what happens? So they got it. They threw in their own who-is server. And then what was it? It was just within a week, they had over about 130,000 unique systems, IP addresses, reaching out to them, and at least 2.5 million queries. And these queries to their who-is server were coming from some .gov, .mil entities. Those are always fun to see, as well as they were kind of laughing, I think well-deservedly, seeing some cybersecurity tools in companies like VirusTotal, URL Scan, and so on, also hitting this who-is server. So as they described, they did not spend $20 to get an XSS. They did not want to just spend their time on that, which already speaks to my heart. They were demonstrating what could be done with, their original thought was, let's pop some who-is clients. Then they're like, well, what if we just get some certs for all of these domains and basically take them over? We can intercept, or we can take them, we can DOS them if we want, and so on. So $20 to get certificates for basically arbitrary .mobi sites that they wanted is a pretty good investment. So I know, John, you're here who's often the voice of reason against with engineering time and refactoring. You have the good business sense about where do we spend our budget? Does $20 here sound like a good investment to take over some CAs?
That's the cost of probably one Vegas beer is very well spent.
Yes.
The interesting part to me on this is like, so Ben and Watchtower, they've had a few really fun posts over the last year, Watchtower Labs. I sort of wonder if I'd love to ask him, like, was he planning this, or in other words, were they just waiting for that thing to expire, or did they just get lucky? That was sort of the first thing when I read this. But no, it's a long post, but it's actually quite entertaining to read. It's got a good personality to it. I think the only thing of interest it's not the only thing. One of the things which probably worth thinking about for a few minutes, this is going from idle research to actually, I wouldn't say they're doing something malicious, but you're getting sort of close to that gray line. And I don't think anything's going to come of it, but just sort of interesting to think about, like, okay, for a very small amount of money, they were able to do something and then go and tell the right people and turn this into research and, let's be honest, marketing. But at the same time, I could see that you always got to be careful if you try and do this type of thing, because someone takes it the wrong way and they decide like they don't like you. Next thing, there's people knocking on your door, and that's not fun. But yeah, it's kudos. Even the original intention of just doing the RCE was like that. That's definitely worthwhile. But $20 to take over, not very popular, but still a TLD is that's a money well spent in my book. Yes.
Yes, I won't put you on the spot to name your favorite TLD, but I think that another lesson learned from this was when it was talking about like certificate issuance and how do you verify that how do you verify ownership of a domain? And this speaks, I think, a little bit more generally to, I'm going to expand this as I often try to do. How do you prove, ownership of an email address or an account as well, who you're reaching out to? There needs to be some type of message, click here to confirm, make this change in DNS record, etc. But they point to a much older discussion from Let's Encrypt that was explaining why they don't rely on whois servers for verifying ownership of, email address ownership of a domain name, because that third party of a whois that's, ostensibly, one of my favorite words, indicating the record for this domain name, the record of ownership, as I mentioned there, it's a third party. And maybe it's up to date, maybe it's correct, maybe not. You want something that's more of a first-party confirmation. And so Let's Encrypt purposefully avoided this type of certificate issuance and protected themselves and anyone who's using that type of process, because they went through that threat modeling consideration. So it's nice to be able to point to such things and see, these discussions were had in the past, made some reasonable trade-offs between where is our trust boundary. And in this case, the .mobi takeover was demonstrating what happens when you violate or when that trust boundary is broken. So great lesson there.
Yeah, I just clicked through on the Let's Encrypt part because I missed that. It makes sense, right? It's private domains and all that type of thing. But this is, again, I had this conversation again with someone last week. It's ongoing, never ending. DNS is not as simple as it seems. And I know this isn't pure DNS, right? But like still, it's like all these things are like, you have to treat these very carefully and think about them very heavily before you start implementing things and otherwise.
And speaking of otherwise, of things that have been discussed and to make changes in, Microsoft is taking steps that drive resiliency and security for Windows customers. Now, here's an article from their blog. It didn't have really too much depth in it, so I don't know how much time we'll spend on it. But it's basically post CrowdStrike. Unsurprisingly, Microsoft got a lot of vendors together and said, maybe we shouldn't do everything in the kernel, or maybe you all don't need to do everything in the kernel. What can we do to help? What can we do to make sure that you have they're not saying this, but I'm adding this, the Mac OS style or a Linux kernel eBPF style insertion into the kernel that can run in user space, or that can be verified, or that has some resiliency, so it doesn't blue screen of death and go from there. So it was, though, I guess I really just wanted to mention it, the idea of resiliency is that callback to chaos engineering, and we had a really fun discussion with Kelly Shortridge back in May of 2023, back in episode 240, very much about resiliency and what that means for security, and focusing on that as an aspect. So that was the best I think I could pull out of here, meatiness-wise, to chew on for a bit. So I don't know if there's anything more that you can extract from this one, John.
I don't think there's anything at all in it. I'm not just trying to be that guy. I promise, I swear.
I set you up for it. It's how
yeah, you did. But really, it's so... It'd be fun to sort of throw us into an LLM and say, what's actually going on here beside the marketing speak? I mean, if I go down to the quotes that they have from people who are in this meeting, like, okay, some VP counsel, privacy and security policy. Actually, is that CrowdStrike? One quote, then I'll shut up. And this is his thoughts after, there's a he, yeah, this is their thoughts, I'll say, after this this little gathering. We appreciate the opportunity to join these important discussions with Microsoft and industry peers on how to best collaborate in building a more resilient and open Windows endpoint security ecosystem that strengthens security for our mutual customers. Sounds like they didn't accomplish a single thing. And that's right. That's not what these meetings are about. If you get a bunch of CTOs and head of products and your head of counsel and that type of thing, yeah, that's not the meeting where anything's going to happen. But so for most companies, they're not putting out a press release about that. Our I'll put it in air quotes, our friends over in Redmond, show us the actual what's going on. I have hope. But like I want to see meat. Show me changes, and brag about that. And they're quite good about that, particularly the threat intel side. So it's not like they're not going to talk about that, but I want to see what that when it comes out.
Yeah, and I think if I can project a little bit, back in RSA this year, there was the big CISA Secure by Design a pledge that a lot of companies did, Microsoft included, many others. And I think one of your comments, I share that too, was it's good to have a pledge, but what will come out of it? So, next year at RSA around, we'll see, we'll do a checkup on what those pledges were, and did anybody talk about or demonstrate changes that they made. In this case, this blog post does talk about what they call it SDP, safe deployment practices. And they, just one example, they talk about gradual and staged deployment of updates to customers. That was one of the things everybody was talking about that post CrowdStrike. So for me too, I think it'll be, let's check back a year from now, and let's see how many tools are still running the kernel, or what kind of kernel hooks can be done to have resiliency for our systems.
Yes, and if someone's hearing my typing in the background, apologies, but I'm putting it on my list of things to follow up for RSA on the CISA Secure by Design, because I think that's a good one.
There is another good one, is you setting me up for a segue. You mentioned LLMs, and here was a blog post from Bishop Fox about exploring large language models from a CTF and a lab perspective. So there's been a lot of CTFs, and we've listed a few over the past year. This one was, what stood out to me was more about their explanation of designing the CTF and more about configuring the LLM to be both the control that was attempted to be bypassed, as well as just a chat box, if you will, for a record store, to be a music assistant. But what was neat is they were pointing out the importance of having an LLM actually be deterministic in the sense of its use as a security control, in the sense of detecting someone who's attempting to do a bypass with longer input than they care for. It's not a jailbreak. It's actually a question that someone would be expected to ask of a hypothetical music store type of chatbot. And the answer produced, as they say, is customer appropriate. And what they mean by that, to a degree too, is it's not going to have foul language, things like that. But it's also, this is about this customer Mike as opposed to this other customer John. So it's not leaking secrets, these types of things. And they talk about just some steps they went through. And listeners, you could do this at home too. Set up your own similar type of CTF, but saying that the LLMs, as basically a probability of what token comes next, is a blessing and a curse. It's the idea that it can come up with some fun phrases, but you want more determinism if you from a security control or from something where you want to be more understand what the expected behavior is going to be. So that was just an angle that stood out. Otherwise, there wasn't too much other things that excited me in the sense of what the CTF was. But near the end, it also has a good explanation of how one of the other Bishop Fox folks was able to do a bypass and basically extract that secret that was hidden in there. So I think a fun write-up. And for those of you who still love prompt injection and aren't fully jaded on it as just the cross-site scripting of our modern LLM age, go take a read.
Yeah, I think that's we sometimes hear from our listeners that they want more hands-on type stuff, and I think this is a good example of that. Excuse my yawn. It's can you, I'm building a new server at home now. I'm going to probably drop an expensive NVIDIA card into it, but even with like something cheap, either renting something in the cloud or getting like a Jetson or something, and go get like a model that you can run at home and play with these things and go and poke and prod. And that's what I like about something like this, of doing something local and actually getting an understanding of how this thing works, how you can improve upon it. Maybe possibly going so far as learning how to improve upon these things and contributing back to the community. But I think it's detailed enough. I guess the reason I'm thinking about this is that the post is detailed enough on how they're doing what they're doing that you can really follow along, and I think that's pretty great.
Yeah, learning the journey of security is much learning the tools, learning the concepts well enough to be able to then have that threat-minded thinking, attacker-minded thinking to say these are the assumptions that were made. How can I go bypass them? And there were some assumptions made in some SSD firmware. So this gets very specific, maybe very niche, but it was something that caught your eye, John. Walk us through this particular CVE you found.
Yeah, sorry, I'm playing with ChatGPT at the same time here because I'm still tickled on that last particular topic. I might come back to it. Where did that tab go? Yeah, this was sort of interesting. So this caught my eye during the last week that there was a buffer overflow in Crucial's SSDs. So it's a very particular model, the MX500 series SSD, with a particular silicon motion controller on there and a particular version of the firmware that's on that. But these folks, we posted a deeper link here on this one, this straight into the GitHub repo with both the description of what's going on as well as the code. They found I think it's a total of 6 bugs, if I remember right. 3. But sort of walks through again, not so much how they found this, but hey, this is a problem which we found in there, and none of them are good. It's all around sort of buffer handling, but the end one, buffer overflow on a SSD that's reproducible, that will probably give folks a little chance of scare. What would be interesting to think about is, since most, I don't know, I'll try this thought, we'll see where it goes. Most modern operating systems, you're a little abstracted away from that SSD. So if you're running this guy on say Windows or Linux as a normal user, it'd be interesting to see if this buffer overflow is capable, or do you have to have admin permissions? I didn't look at it from that point of view, but in other words, is there some sort of mitigating factor between vulnerable disk that stores your information and the user that's just Joe user sitting on top of, or Jane user that doesn't have any particular permissions, and can they leverage that? But either way, for folks who are looking for a little lower level meaty stuff, there's your present for the week.
Present for the week. And yeah, at the end of their README, they have the fact that explains a little bit of the threat model. And I think, as John pointed out, that this is not earth-shattering. Not everybody needs to start worrying about this. What came to my mind here when reading through it is that we just had the LLM article before this, and we've talked in the past about the AI cyber challenge at DEF CON. We've talked about just LLMs used for secure code. the issues in this one, in this example, seem like very simple in concept, meaning that they're basically about math. Mishandling offsets, mishandling the calculation of how much data do I have versus how much data can go into a buffer. So again, pretty classic. This is old school frac. One of the questions, I think, a rhetorical question for me would be, how much could an LLM find this versus just a good SAST tool versus even just a good compiler like an LLVM, throwing that V in there to demonstrate the compiler, can see these types of calculations being off. Because I'm going to jokingly add, there's the current cliche of how many R's are in strawberries that LLMs can't even get counting right. So is this one of those areas that math is hard and LLMs are going to fail, or SAS tools are good, or do we want to keep throwing LLMs against very classic C code like this to find such problems?
I think so. And I just remembered an article which I didn't get in here, so I'll talk about it very briefly related to this, which is, it looks like Google is looking at replacing their C++ code with Rust for Android. So again, I think there's interesting ways to see these LLMs, and I think if we're able to look at them as a tool which can help us do that type of thing, either something which would scare manager me in like a really bad, horrible way, like you want to take how many weeks just to rewrite something that's working, right? And like if we're able to sort of bring that down and use these tools in that way, I think it's great. Or at the same time, like, hey, I can go and get a few automated reasoning folks that cost God knows how much because they're all PhDs, and I can have them work on this finding a buffer overflow in my hard drive controller for the next 6 months. Or they can program a fuzzer and let that run for a year and see what happens. But if we can do something with actually an LLM that can look at the code and sort of look at it from that point of view, it's at least caught my interest. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing there too is, I think what you often do is risk, not just pure, here's a CVE with a CVSS score.
Risk. Yes.
It's risk, and that's why I'm setting up another article from Phil Venables about the 6 truths of cyber risk quantification. And it's an update, or kind of a bit of a revisit of an article on the similar topic that he wrote 4 years ago. And I wanted to pull it in a little bit. I thought it might tie in with our discussion with Dustin, in the sense that, with secure training, secure code, or just call it security awareness, we can talk about outcomes like fewer vulns, but fewer vulns isn't necessarily a risk calculation, because what vulns are we dealing with? Are these vulns that could have been exploited anyway? Was there easy exploitation, easier inroads into our network through lack of SSO, lack of phishing resistant credentials, etc.? And the very first point he makes here, this article, risk quantification and risk communication, and the difference thereof, he talks about just some oversimplified calculations like risk equals threat times vulnerability, as he describes it. And what does, kind of rhetorically asking, what does a risk of 0.3 versus a risk of 0.4 mean? I think that's kind of what he's getting to. And for me, I like to focus on the risk communication aspect in the sense of describing the threat model, or this is why this would be impactful, and answering the why, which is very much a qualification and not quantification. But everybody does love numbers, and numbers also don't necessarily, they can influence us psychologically, in the sense that, oh, it's a CVSS 10, we've got to jump on it. But then we get into other things like his point number 2, which I loved, is the risk equals hazard plus outrage. And there's a lot of things that a vulnerability could come up and be exploited in a way that, like, wait, why are we talking about this? But there's outrage for perhaps well-deserved reasons, or just misunderstood reasons. But John, that one's getting your attention, so I would love to hear your reaction to this.
That was actually my favorite one in there, I have to say, was the remember risk equals hazard plus outrage. I think I like about this, even back to, as you started walking into this article, is we've seen, it gives me bad flashbacks, like some of the formulas I've seen people come up with, like, how do you calculate risk based off vulnerabilities? I'm like, oh my God, stop. And I get like, it's I've got a friend who the software is designed to, do risk or vulnerability management at a very large scale, like software or companies that have like, 30, 40, 50,000 software developers, that type of thing. There's like a lot of stuff going. How do you keep track of that? And I get it, but at the same time, when you see the formula is getting more and more complex, or like, all these different sort of variables to tune and adjust, it's like, oh my God, it's just like, please help me. And this is going to the exact opposite. There has to be something in between, right? I understand that for those complex environments where, you're not trying to find the needle in the pile of hay, that the pile of hay is all needles. Just where do you start type thing. So I get it. And I know that's purely vulnerability, not risk, but they're close in this particular case. Yeah, and I think the other one in there I liked was it 4? Yeah, a tree falls in the forest without a feedback loop. In other words, this is sort of a standard thing for me in a way of I believe in that idea of engineering. What we're talking about software engineering or security engineering, that I shouldn't be changing something until I got a baseline to actually know how am I affecting that thing, right? It's like you think of bridges, whatever else. You're not just going to go and start digging. And this is that same type of thing. What is my risk? What's my risk now, right? If you come in as a consultant or a new employee in a company or anything like that, like what are you starting with? What's going on here? Do they have an understanding of their risk? Maybe they have like, a lot of hysterical going on, hysterisy? A lot of craziness going on. And it's how do you bring it back to a point where like, okay, this is where we are now. This is a way that we can measure it that we'll agree upon. It might not be the best, might not be industry standard, but it works for us. Now, how do we inch that forward in the direction we want to go? And then, the risk communication on number one of quantification, but also communication. Like, as I was just saying, how do you describe that out to someone? Like, this is where we are. This is the state of things. So as usual, he does a great job on sort of simplifying. I don't want to say he's dumbing it down, but simplifying this that comes from the result of probably talking about this day in, day out for months and months and months. So good post.
Yeah, and I think the way you pick number 4, I'll pick number 5 about, all risk quantification is wrong, but some is useful as a parenthetical. And it does talk about come up with 20 or so top metrics that are, as I'm quoting, emblematic of or proxy for risk in the environment. And here is where I did want to tie that into the idea of like secure coding, security awareness, is that rather than like, are you doing training on cross-site scripting and SQL injection because those are on some list or a checklist or you need to meet those, or because those are emblematic, they are prevalent or potentially prevalent at your organization? If not, pick a different control or pick at something that you think is more consequential, has more impact on countering attackers. And it doesn't use the phrase attacker cost, but near the end of that number 5, it's really talking more about what is the attacker cost of your controls, and are you imposing one that's useful, that's good, that's valuable so that you can detect unauthorized intruder. All intruders, I think, are unauthorized or unauthorized actors in your network. And I better stop there before my mind and my tongue are going in different directions. John, any parting thoughts on the news this week?
Risk equals hazard plus outrage. I think that's going to be my thought for the week. Minimize outrage. Well, I guess you want to minimize hazard too, so you want both of those things to go down. That's our goal for the week.
Oh, there we go. Live on the edge, maximize hazards, minimize outrage. That probably not the AppSec t-shirt we want, but we'll work on it. In any case, thank you very much, John. Very much appreciate the lack of outrage, or the outrage that you kept in check as we talked about the hazards this week. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Remember to subscribe, share on the socials, check out the show notes. And speaking of things that are hazardous, check out Live Fast, Die Hard by Power Rob. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.